Watching for whales. I chose this title for two reasons. One, of course, is we're always keeping a lookout when we're boating to see if we can spot whales in the distance, and it's just so neat to be able to observe these animals. But the other reason is that we need to know and be aware of where they are so that we can be respectful of the distance and we don't get too close and disturb their feeding habits or when they're resting. In the cruising grounds that we normally operate in the San Juan Islands, a pod of orcas would be the most commonly observed kind of whale. As we start heading north and into the Strait of Georgia and up around North Vancouver Island, then humpback whales will become more prominent. This is a particular sighting that we made near Middle Natch Island, which is about 10 miles south of Campbell River. This is a female, nicknamed Harlequin, first observed in 2019 in Mexico. And if you're wondering how I know all this, then we'll talk a little bit later about some of the neat new technology that's come about that has helped us identify whales that, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So here's an interesting data set that comes from the Marine Education and Research Society. They're based up on Northeast Vancouver Island, and these are whales that they have photo identified in that area. And it wasn't until recently, like in 1967, that the last whaling station was closed in BC. So for many years, there were no humpbacks or very few observed in any particular year. But starting about the year 2000, the number of whales that have been seen in these areas has gone up dramatically, exponentially. The red bars indicate the total number of individually identified whales seen every year, and the blue bars are whales that not only were seen that year but in previous years. So those are called resightings, and they're an indication that whales are coming back to the same area to feed, which is really good. It means that's a good environmental story right there. This is a somewhat similar graph showing the geographical locations of where whales have been seen. It's a little bit dated, it only goes up to 2008, but at the same time we can see that the southern end of Vancouver Island on the Strait of Juan de Fuca and out into the Pacific Gulf there, as well as up around the eastern side or the western side of Johnstone Strait, Port McNeill, and up around Cape Caution tends to be a concentration of whales. This neat little video made by MERS as well, See a Blow, Go Slow, is a good reminder for us that whales, humpbacks, tend to be less aware of boats, so they're frequently found resting on the surface. So we need to be particularly cautious about our boating activities in whale waters. They've been trying to promote a whale warning flag procedure where if you see one of these flags with the orange and yellow and black fluke, it's an indication, like a diver down flag, that you should slow down, be prepared to alter course. There are regulations, of course, that require us to keep a certain minimum distance away from whales, at least 100 yards from humpbacks, and typically it's double or triple that for orcas. The regulations are a little bit different in the U.S., Alaska, Washington, and BC, so just be aware of what those are for the area that you're going to be boating in. And then if we see a large congregation of birds flying around and diving on the surface, or an actual blow, then those are other indications that whales are in the vicinity and we should be alert. Whales breathe through their nostrils. They have two, just like us. Their nostrils are located on the top of their head, so they don't have to raise their head out of the water to breathe. They only breathe through their nostrils, and the mouth is just used for feeding. They can hold their breath for up to 30 minutes, so when they exhale, it's very forceful. I can send a plume of mist and spray up 30 feet high into the air, which in a way is good for us. Then we can see in a distance the plume as compared to the actual whale itself, which is just a low black outline on the surface of the water. I mentioned this whale identification technique where they used the unique markings on the underside of whales' flukes, tail flukes. And in the past, an army of volunteers would spend weeks taking pictures that were received, comparing them to pictures in a catalog, and spending a lot of time trying to identify each whale. And recently, they have begun using this artificial intelligence software that uses a technology just like facial identification to recognize the patterns. And in minutes now, they can compare the photographs that they get each year with the photographs in their catalog and make the correlation between whales. This group called Happy Whale, there's a URL up there. They've been pioneering this research effort. You can go to that website. They will give you some instructions on how to submit your photographs. And they'll then use that software to identify those whales with the whales in their catalog. And they'll send you a list of all the whales that you've submitted, where they've been seen, and how often, as well as each time that whale has been identified, you get a new email. So every month I get a couple emails saying, hey, such and such a whale was seen in Hawaii or Mexico. This is an example of one of the pictures that I took in Alaska, and they compared it with a picture that somebody else had taken in Hawaii. And you can see, if you look at the markings on the other side of the flukes, these are in fact the same whale. Now, this particular whale doesn't have a nickname. Its ID is SEAK for Southeast Alaska, 5269. It has been sighted 28 times, 5 times in Hawaii and 23 times in Alaska. It's 16 years old, or at least, since it was first sighted in 2007. Interestingly, the whales that feed in Southeast Alaska and in northern BC typically winter in Hawaii, and then where they socialize and meet other whales and breed and have calves, and then in the summer they migrate back to Alaska to feed. In southern BC, in contrast, most of those whales have wintering grounds in Mexico. So it's interesting, there's 2 different breeding populations of humpback. Many whales don't have those white markings on their flukes. They're mostly black, and in which case the AI software is capable of using the unique crenellations or bumps along the trailing edge of the fluke in order to match whales. There's an example of 2 different photographs by different people that show the same kind of patterns, and they were able to identify this as the same whale. This is back to Harlequin. This is the whale we saw up in Middle Natch Island. I just wanted to show you some videos that we took of some unique behavior of this particular whale. Very active. We probably spent half an hour watching this one whale, alternating between this particular tail slapping behavior, and then it would go and lay on its back, and she would wave her flippers around in the air, and then she'd do that for a little while, then she'd go back to tail slapping. The people that helped me identify this whale didn't really know what this behavior signified, but guessed that the whale was just trying to attract attention, maybe get other whales to visit. And you can see in the photograph on the lower left that this whale has some very distinctive white patches on the tips of its flukes, and white markings along the vertebra, along the base of the tail as well. And I want to talk a little bit about this technique that I've had a chance to watch a couple of times on our trips, called bubble or lunge feeding. And this is a method that humpbacks use to sort of corral or concentrate bait fish. And the idea is they'll swim along underwater, releasing a stream of bubbles. And they'll do this continuously in a circle or spiral. And this is what it would look like from above. That this is taken by the Alaska Whale Foundation. They're based up on Baranof Island in Alaska. And they took this really cool little clip showing a whale concentrating fish using this bubble technique and then lunging up to grab a big mouthful. Yeah, very cool. We've seen this type of feeding behavior a couple of times on our trips. It's always a really cool thing to see. Last year on a trip from Warm Springs down to Petersburg, we saw a distance a plume, and then as we got closer, we saw that it wasn't just one plume, it was a number of whales all in one close area. And as we got closer, we saw whales were, quite a few of them were diving. And then after that, in a few 3 or 4 minutes after they dove, up they all came and grabbed a big mouthful of food. So the idea that has been explained to me is that as the whales swim around and create these bubbles, they'll do so for a few minutes, and then one whale will give the feeding call, and then they all come up in unison. And this is a video I took of that happening. The video of the whales coming up, I never did get really a very good one, although I did get some good stills. But it was always fun watching them afterwards. So they've already come up and grabbed their food, and now they're all taking deep breaths in preparation for diving and then repeating the process. In counting the flukes as the whales dove, I was able to determine there were 17 in this particular pod. I submitted photographs. I think I had about 10 that were good images of their flukes, and they were all identified by Happy Whale. In that same area, well, this is a picture from one of the commercial whale watching outfits. You can hire them to take you out on their boat. And they were made this nice little graph with each blue bubble and the number showing inside how many times they've seen whales at that particular location. You can see that this area of Frederick Sound, kind of north of Petersburg and south of Juneau, is a real hot spot for being able to see whales, and this is right where we saw the whales as well. At the end of that trip, one of my daughters has a friend that's a marine biologist and a wildlife artist, and we sent her some photographs of the whales bubble feeding and some other pictures, and she composited them together to create this really cool painting that she made, Sarah McComb Turbot. She takes other commissions, so I'm sure she'd be happy to paint something for you too. Anyway, hope you all get a chance to see some whales on your next boating trip, and thanks for watching.